We are back, and we are joined now by Hayden Clarkin, also known as the Transit Guy on social media. He is a transit advocate who studied civil engineering at the University of Connecticut, also works in the transportation industry. Hayden, thanks so much for coming on the show.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me. Huge fan. So thank you.
Well, huge fan of your Twitter account as well. For anybody who wants to start to get radicalized about transit policy and how insane the United States has been in making everything catered to the car, Hayden's account is a great place to start. And never has that obsession with, I guess, maintaining our infrastructure surrounding the car been more obvious than the news from last week that continues into this week. New York Governor Kathy Hochul torpedoed congestion pricing, which was a plan in New York that had been laid out and had been taken into account for years at this point. We were making policy choices in this city based on the presumption that congestion pricing was taking effect. Just take us through the past week or so and what's happened in New York.
Sure. So I don't really even know where to start because this has just been the worst political move, I think, in New York state history. And I think that's saying a lot. So this has been something that congestion pricing has been something that the United States has been trying to do since 2007 under the Bush administration. After like multiple failed attempts, we get to the transit crisis of the New York City subway in 2017. Everyone kind of remembers there was literally a state of emergency declared by Governor Cuomo at the time due to how bad the deferred maintenance on the subway system was. And so the plan was, we have such a huge backlog of things to do. We need to do congestion pricing. This has been too long and we need the money. And so basically in 2019, the state mandated by putting it in the budget, MTA, we're giving you authority. You need to raise $1 billion a year, starting in whenever you approve of it, to make money for the capital plan and for capital improvements. And so that looks like $1 billion a year, which the bond that they would take out, which would have been $15 billion, would have been used to pay for. And so that's kind of where we're at. So in 2023, the US DOT finally gave all the final approvals. They were like, go at it, fam. You got this. We believe in you. Unfortunately, about 1 million lawsuits came, particularly from Governor Murphy, Rep. Gottheimer, who we all have our own opinions about, of you cannot do this. This will hurt New Jersey residents a lot to charge $15 to go into Manhattan, the densest and most transit-rich place on the continent. So take that for what you will. Governor Hochul really was holding out for a very long time, up until December, where she had a whole rally around it. And then 2.5 weeks ago, when she was in Sweden and said, we cannot wait to do congestion pricing in New York City. And then on June 5th, we got an about face. And now with 2 days left in the session, which on June 5th was 2 days left in the session, she decided, we'll figure out another way to get the $1 billion. And everyone was like, what? Excuse me? Yeah. After spending $590 million on all of the equipment and the tolling, it's already set up, already ready for June 30th. So 25 days before, after literally years and years and years and years of planning and 28,000 environmental documents, we are where we are.
So that, I mean, first of all, I will editorialize and say we have remarked on this program that she may be one of the dumbest Democratic politicians of all time. I mean, it's up there, because this was insane to do this within weeks of this literally taking effect. And as you say, the infrastructure being put in place and paid for, and budgets being created around the presumption that we would have this influx of money coming in from congestion pricing, $1 billion a year or more, to help pay for billions of dollars in subway, bus, other transit repairs and improvements, which is desperately needed in the city that doesn't have a lot of like handicap access, has a lot of delays, many other issues with the New York City transit system. But her claim was that this would affect regular New Yorkers or regular people commuting into New York from New Jersey, from Connecticut, from Westchester County, whatever.
Correct.
What can you explain why that claim isn't necessarily true? Because it seems as if the income for people who drive into the city already is fairly high compared to those who take transit.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I want to say I don't know if this was a decision Kathy Hochul made on her own. I do think it was congressional delegation thinking about
Hakeem Jeffries, for sure, apparently was worried about suburban voters.
Absolutely. And so when you think of, I did the math based on the report, we're talking about 50,000 commuters within the areas that are like currently like competitive of all of the New Jersey and New York collar congressional districts. About 50,000 people would be subject to paying that within all of those districts in total. So, I mean, if you take $1 billion a year and you divide it by 50,000 people, I think you just can pay them to stay home at that point. So yeah, the idea that a ton of working class people are just driving into lower Manhattan has just been patently false. There has been, as I said before, 28,000 pages of environmental studies and reviews to show that that is in fact not the case. And of the 900,000 vehicles that come into Manhattan every single day, 170,000 people would be subject to that tax, which is about 1.5% of all commuters that go into New York City, all 5 boroughs. So it is a small, minute group of people. Now you might say, well, what about people who, might have a disability or a low income? There are exemptions for people who are of low income. If you make $60,000 or less a year, you would not be subject to the fee, as well as if you had a disability or you were or you were a vehicle that transported people with disabilities to medical appointments or whatnot, you also would not be subject to this. Take the train. I don't really know what to say to people. I mean, take the train. And for Phil Murphy and Josh Gottheimer to sit there and watch New Jersey Transit literally decay and face a $1 billion shortfall as he goes around and puts a $10 billion highway widening plan through that nobody wants. I don't see how the lack of transit that you have is an excuse when you are the governor. Then fix it. Right. If you think the transit is so bad that people cannot get out of their cars, then fix it. It's an indictment on yourself.
Let's pull up this graph here just to continue to illustrate this point. New York Focus does great work, and they have these 2 graphs that illustrate how significant the problem is in lower Manhattan and Midtown. So it's 60th and lower, excluding the West Side Highway and the FDR, which are the 2 major highways that go across the coast of lower Manhattan for people who are not in the city. So
just to be clear, those people are exempt from paying. If
exactly.
You on West Side Highway or FDR, you are exempt from paying unless you enter the zone. So
enter the middle of the island where it's
like into a local street, correct? But
exactly.
You can literally loop around all day and you would not be charged.
And it's 60th and lower for downtown, which includes Times Square. It includes much of Midtown Manhattan. It includes a lot of tourist destinations. Madison Square Garden, right? Ooh. So this is a graph of Manhattan traffic speeds. Mm-hmm. So you see here how they have sunk. It is sunk to a new low, and that one of the lines there is the Central Business District. And the Midtown, which is really primarily, I think, the focus of congestion pricing, you can see how that's around 5 miles or less than 5 miles an hour. Yeah. About 5 miles an hour. So the article says that average taxi speed last month was 6.6 miles per hour in the Central Business District, where the program would have applied. But when you look at just Midtown, which is really, again, the biggest problem here, it actually is 4.5 miles an hour, barely faster than a brisk walk, is what New York Focus talks about. So it is so congested there, and it's also contributing to air pollution, which lowers people's standards of living, that you would move around faster in Midtown Manhattan walking than you would in a car because there are so many dang cars in that area of the city.
Absolutely. There are a few million people every day who take the New York City bus system, the MTA bus system, and they're subject to average speeds in these buses between 5 miles per hour and about 9 miles per hour, depending on the line. And you're moving how many people? And, you know, when you say, well, transit's not good enough, that's why I have to drive. It's a cyclical argument, right? Buses are slow and therefore you drive, and then you are in front of a bus, which is slow, which then makes other people not want to take the bus and therefore drive, making the bus slow again. So it's this cyclical argument, and it's just not one that really holds water. And I don't think that, arguably, I mean, I'm sure I could be corrected, but I can't imagine one of the biggest economic generators in the country having speeds of 4.5 miles per hour is good for the economy. And there is a hidden cost to congestion in general that we never talk about.
Yeah, this same article talks about how it's cost billions of dollars even if you just care about the money flowing into the economy, those delays have cost money for the city and for people affected by it. And then you also see here in the second graph that deaths from traffic-related incidents in Manhattan are continuing to hold, and it took a slight dip in 2020 because of the pandemic, but it holds at a rate that's fairly high. Last year it was 28 people killed in crashes in Manhattan, but the injury rate is even more substantial, 6,000 people injured due to traffic rates. Yeah. I saw people clowning on Kathy Hochul, who was talking about how watch out for shark attacks when you're going to Montauk or whatever, but not necessarily worried about the traffic deaths and injuries that result from so many cars being packed into such a tiny island and urban area.
Yeah, we're saying this the morning or the afternoon after an 88-year-old woman was killed walking across the street in Brooklyn yesterday. So this is something insanely real that we're not talking about. Pedestrian deaths have been the highest they've ever been since, I think, the 80s. This is not getting better, especially with cars being bigger. I would rather get hit by a Prius than a Dodge Ram. And as cars and SUVs get bigger, this is kind of the issue that we're dealing with. One thing I will say is that she's also been getting a lot of flack for saying that she goes to diners, and she learned about congestion pricing being bad from her time in the diner. And she used a diner that is literally in Grand Central Station, which is the largest train station in the world, to say that people from New Jersey, a state known for diners with 500 diners, that New Jersey residents would not go and drive into 42nd Street and find parking, I guess, around Grand Central to go to this one diner. And therefore, that's why $15 billion of capital funding should be rejected.
Okay, so I will say this, and I grew up in New Jersey, Diner Central, love it about New Jersey. New York City used to have more diners. They don't really have them as many anymore, in part because it's just too expensive to run a diner and with the real estate that's available to people in the city. So it's both antiquated and dumb and makes no sense. And just the politics of this, apparently her office was shocked by the backlash, but it was so... Brad Lander, who is the city comptroller, has announced that they're potentially going to sue Hochul's office over this because of, again, all that went into the planning that was happening in the city surrounding this funding mechanism.
Absolutely. So the MTA, as actually in the law in 2019, was compelled to do the congestion pricing. So when the governor revoked that, that was not actually an official edict that could stop the MTA. So the MTA could still today on June 30th turn on the gantries. It was more of like, is the MTA going to go to war with Kathy Hochul? And I think they've chosen not to do that, it sounds like. But yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense given that they have the authority currently on the books to do so. And one thing also that we haven't talked about, and I know you brought up accessibility, there are 472 stations in the New York City subway system. It is a massive system. I think it's number 3 in the world for number of stations. 69% do not have elevators. So the money that would have gone to this capital plan would have actually added 70 elevators as part of this massive plethora of capital spending, it would have gone to 70 elevators that are located in all 5 boroughs. And that's not happening anymore. Or at least it's been deprioritized, as MTA has kind of said in the last couple of days. But the really big problem here is that the MTA was sued for not having ADA accessible stations after the ADA Act passed under the first Bush administration. And so they are being compelled to, by 2055, all stations have to be accessible. And now if we're talking about that, we're talking about if you literally were born the day that it was signed into law, you would be 65 by the time the MTA subway system was fully accessible. And this throws a massive wrench into that because now we are pausing all of this elevator work until we can figure out what is going on.
I mean, that lawsuit sounds like it has a lot of merit. You're not allowed to. That was one of the more successful, honestly, regulatory moves that the federal government has ever made, which is to make every place handy accessible. It's just not the case in New York City whatsoever. And as you say, a majority of the stations, 69% don't have elevators. That's
Correct.
A violation of the federal statute.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's what we're now adding into the mix. And also Second Avenue subway, which is supposed to move 150,000 people a day once open, is completely told to stop work. Because one of the things that we didn't realize, or people don't realize, is that when the federal government comes in and says, hey, for Second Avenue subway, we're going to give you $3-point-something billion, that's a match to the state's funding. And so when the state does not have that funding anymore, the federal monies that were earmarked to it are now in flux and are not kept. And so now we have to figure out are we have to going through this whole funding process again to fund something that we've already started working on? This is the Kathy Hochul transportation plan right now that we're seeing. And one thing she said was in her speech, which was a crazy about face, was this will hurt small businesses. And her proposal was to add a payroll tax in lieu of a usage tax for cars.
That was going to be my next question. Can you explain that? Because
I can't.
So a payroll tax is a tax on people making wages, and not everybody, right? But I don't know how they would structure it, but it's lower to middle to maybe even middle upper income people, where it's a tax on their paycheck to pay for this. But Correct. It also, if you were to just say, okay, that's the funding mechanism now, we'll tax New Yorkers more. That money was also supposed to go out to train lines in the suburbs to help improve them as well. Correct. So that's money getting taken out of the pockets of regular New Yorkers to help the suburbs double.
10% of the congestion pricing in the law is that it has to help Metro North, which serves Connecticut and upstate New York, as well as Long Island Railroad, which serves Long Island. And so with her idea, New Yorkers would get taxed to then pay for the suburban transit systems and train systems of people who would not, or of drivers who would come in, still not have to pay anything. And we would have to pay their improvements for them.
Right. And while also not disincentivizing them from coming into the city via car, which is also harmful for our environment, which should not get lost in this discussion, this is also has been endorsed by environmentalists, as you say. And it's, as we kind of wrap up here, Hayden, congestion pricing has happened in other cities in the world. This would have been the first of its kind in the United States. But this is not like New York is making this out of whole cloth. I know London has congestion pricing, and it's taken effect, and it's had some good results. Can you talk a little bit about that? Sure.
You were bringing up pedestrian and traffic deaths. Traffic deaths since 2019 in London have gone down 40% since it was implemented. Traffic's gone down. And one thing in the last London elections, I think it happened, I want to say maybe 2 months ago, there were London elections for the mayoral race. And Sadiq Khan, who is the mayor of London, who is a major champion for congestion pricing, this was a referendum on, do we still want to have congestion pricing because this man wants to expand it? And the places in which he wanted to expand it were the biggest swings towards him in this race. People see how good it is. And I understand it's not popular to think like, oh, I'm going to get taxed to like live my day-to-day life. But once it's actually implemented, these plans have been super popular. And it's just one of those things where it's really sad because San Francisco's been thinking about it and other cities have been thinking about it as a way to make their transit better. And if New York City's not going to do it, it really spells doom for the rest of all of the cities who might potentially want to do it. If it's not good for New York City, then it's not good for anywhere. And so that's kind of what Kathy Hochul is doing. And also one last thing is the political idea or like the political thought to then 3 days after canceling congestion pricing, go to a car dealer fundraiser for yourself. That was
a little on the nose.
Dealer association at $5,000 to $10,000 a head. The math ain't mathing. Like, just you need to fire your team and like rehire better advisors because that is a crazy optics.
Yeah, it's a little much, Kathy. Just tone it down slightly. Well, Hayden, really appreciate your time today, and thanks for that wonderful explainer about this. Hayden Clarkin, the transit guy. You can follow him on Twitter. Where else can people find your work, Hayden?
I'm on Threads and Instagram, the transit guy, and then on Twitter, the _transit_ guy. Elon will not give me that. Will not let me remove those underscores.
Oh, all right. Well, appreciate you. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of your day, Hayden, and talk to you soon.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.